Greetings, fellow quitters, and welcome back to the Command Q podcast. We're your hosts. I'm John Pelfrey.
And I'm Maari Casey.
And the quits just keep on coming this summer. We're back with another quick quit. And today we're going to talk about, quit not knowing your neighbor. I know some of our listeners live in apartments. Some live in subdivisions. Some of us live in pretty rural areas. But no matter where you're set up or where you live, this is a topic that's really, really important. And it's becoming increasingly so. Just this week, we had some serious flash flooding in our area. And so knowing your neighbor became a pretty important deal here in our little town of Hillsboro, where I live. And so today we're going to talk about what it means to know your neighbors, how to break the ice with people that maybe you've lived next to for a little while, but you just never had the guts to knock on their door and say, "Hey, I'm John and I'm your neighbor." So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So, Maari, what was your relationship like with your neighbors when you were a kid?
So I grew up in West Virginia. So we didn't live in like a neighborhood where it was like sidewalk neighbor. It was like neighbors down that way and neighbors kind of over the hill. But I definitely think we had a pretty good relationship with our neighbors in general, just because we were a little bit more rural outside of the city and we had snow and things like that. And our neighbors next to us, they were older and they had a handicapped daughter that lived with them. And so we definitely kind of kept eyes on each other's property and would, I know my parents would always like share tools and different things like that. And just kind of, if there was ever a snowstorm, then my dad would go over and shovel their driveway and, they would loan us things. And there was never a question about like, oh, I need some eggs. Like, there wasn't like, we'll get in the car and go get some. It was like, well, we'll just walk next door and ask Gladys if she has some extra eggs. It was just kind of something pretty normal. And then as we grew up, knowing people in the neighborhood. Of course, we went to school with a lot of them, which I know has changed a bit now. But we always had a pretty good idea of who needed help. And if somebody in the neighborhood got sick, then neighbors would bring food over. And so it was definitely pretty normal for me to know my neighbors and to know what resources they had, what they needed, if people needed help, who was the elderly people and who needed that kind of help. And so so that's kind of how I grew up. What about you?
Yeah, same thing. I definitely knew my next door neighbors. I played with a lot of the kids in our neighborhood. So we all kind of ran around on our bikes and would hop from one house to another and on a Saturday afternoon. And there was sort of a lot of informality about it too. It wasn't like we had to plan a play date or any of this stuff that happens now. It was literally like you'd see a kid outside because there was nothing else to do. And you just like yell down the street or get on your bike and ride your bike down the street and, and just start playing and hanging out. And there was just sort of nothing more to it. It wasn't more complicated than that. And saying that now, I feel so old. I feel so old because I'm not sure that that's relatable to, let's say, like 10, 11, 12-year-olds now. Maybe it is in certain subdivisions, but I feel like even with people that I don't live in a subdivision, you do. But I feel like even in that situation, it's a little more formal. Like the kids still, there's a little bit more planning or there's, is it okay with your parents and all that? Like I didn't even ask that. Like, is it okay with your parents? Like, are you kidding? We just would start playing. Like it wasn't, and so I think it was a different kind of deal, but we definitely knew a lot of our neighbors and we did know, who needed help or if there was a lady that lived next door to us who was a single elderly woman. And so, we would check on her if the power went out. My dad would go over there and knock on the door and make sure she's okay. Sometimes the power would go out and we'd go over to her house and just hang out and sit with her until the power came back on. That was easier than us like bringing her to our house. So it was, we took care of each other, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that people are still doing that kind of stuff in different places in different ways? Maybe not as much.
I'm not sure. Like, at least not where I live. I know all my neighbors and I've lived in the same house for 20 years. And in fact, one of my neighbors has lived here the exact same amount of time as us, basically. Actually, two of us moved in within 6 months of each other. And then another one grew up in the house across the street and inherited it from his parents. So we've all been here. And so we know each other. We know each other pretty well. But I would say generally, I'm not sure that people just go and hang out at each other's houses as neighbors anymore. There's definitely none of that King of the Hill, Hank Hill situation going on where there's like four guys in an alley drinking beer going, yep. And, and they all know each other really well. I do kind of wish that we had that though. That feels like a bygone era. I don't know.
I know. Yeah. I mean, I think that the reason I wanted to talk about this was we had that conversation with Craig Caudill back, we're coming up close to a year almost. back in the fall last year, that was one thing that he said that we were missing, in our country, is that kind of community of neighborly just connections and know-how.
Yeah.
And I do think there's aspects of it that are super important. I think it's knowing what resources are out there, like what our neighbors have. Like we don't all need to have, lawn mowers. We can all share lawn mowers and all that kind of concept of like who has the generator if the hurricane comes. I think that's part of it. But I also think I realized too, and you probably had this growing up how you did, it's like there's a little bit of serving in your neighborhood too, where you mentioned like an elderly neighbor who, like we had that, and my dad would be like, go down and mow the neighbor's yard. And he'd be like, complain as a kid, but it's like, he would do it because, she can't get out to mow the lawn or can't get out to shovel the snow. And so there was an element of service that I think doesn't happen in neighborhoods as much anymore. I mean, I think my neighborhood, we have an HOA, we have a swim team, we have all that. And so there's some community connection through those kid activities. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing now is I think what might hold us back a little bit, or what might be kind of different, is that we're not staying. I mean, you and I are a little different too, but because we've been in this area for a while, but it's like we're not staying in one place for as long as we did when our parents grew up, where they lived in the same house that they got married, moved into a house, and they stayed there. Sometimes generations stayed in the same house. And I think that like transient nature of people living in a place for 5 years and then either moving out of the area or upgrading to a larger house, like there's always people coming and going. I think it's hard to like build a community when there's so much people coming in and out of the community.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a big part of it. I also think that we are just generally more isolated in a lot of ways. Like we all tend to have all of our own stuff. A lot of times it's like, well, if I need a generator, I should buy my own. Even though generators are a lot of money, and it would make sense that if you had some neighbors, maybe you pull together some money and you agree on a plan. That would be a better way to go about it in some ways. But yeah, I think the sort of self-sufficiency or independence mindset that we have, and this I think is a lot an American mentality and mindset, that we should be self-sufficient, that we should have all of the things that we need in order to protect our family. And that then becomes a very personal thing as opposed to a communal thing. Like we should have all the things that we need as a group in order to protect all of our families would be a nice way to do it. But for some reason I think that's shifted over time. We've become a little more, guarded, close to the vest, isolated, I guess would be the right word. More isolated, especially as we've, put these things in our hand, and we've, most of the time we spend is doing this, and then we're building an online community, and the online community is great. And I think there's really powerful, benefits to having an online community, but that certainly can't replace being friends with your next door neighbor.
Yeah, your Facebook followers can't get your mail.
They cannot get your mail. And I will say that like my neighbor actually helped pick up a package for me a couple weeks ago when I was out of town, and it was really, really nice and very helpful. You can certainly do the same for him. So
well, and I think that's one thing is like you mentioned the need to get stuff. And I think there's an aspect too of just the pride we feel in having everything. And like that's like a bigger picture of like, we got to have all of the things. It's like, it's a little bit embarrassing to be like, I'm the neighbor that doesn't have the generator. So I'm afraid to ask, hey, can I plug into your generator? Which, I mean, I guess it's always been around, but like, I feel like growing up, there wasn't as much embarrassment about asking for help. I think we have a harder time being like, oh, well, I feel bad going over and asking our neighbor to like pick up the mail from our house for 3 weeks or whatever. There's that. And I remember my mother-in-law talking about this idea of serving. And she always said, she's like, if you don't ask for help, then you're denying somebody the opportunity to serve you, which is really true because I feel great helping my neighbors. If someone comes over and is like, hey, can I borrow your leaf blower? Totally. Awesome. Here you go. So I think that's something to think about too, but it does feel like it's gotten harder to ask for help because there's this, I don't know if it's pride or if it's embarrassment or if it's, we're showing our lack of self-reliance, but I think that causes a lot of like, I'll just handle myself kind of situations and neighbors too.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've got to put our pride aside a little bit. And, another part of this, this opens up a can of worms, but I think consumerism has a lot to do with this too. Mm-hmm. This idea that like we all need to buy all the latest stuff. Everything's just about buying and then judgment about who has what and who doesn't have what. And then it's a reflection on like, I don't know, your ability to be able to afford all the things in order to do what. And it's like, but no one can do that unless you have significant amounts of money, like a lot of money. And I think you and I both grew up in rural America and in places where that wasn't an expectation of just the average family in the average town, was that we would all have all the stuff plus a 4-wheel drive vehicle
Right.
that we could get out in the snow in, and like, all of the things. And I think there's become a little bit more of that kind of expectation too, especially living in what I would say is an affluent area in a metropolitan sort of city environment. There's definitely a different type of pressure that I didn't feel as a kid growing up in sort of smaller town rural America, where it was like we all have to take care of each other. We need each other in order to get by.
Yeah.
And like you said, that the service mentality is a big part of it too. We all serve our jobs and we all serve other things, and just we forget that like helping out a neighbor does feel good.
It does. Yeah. Well, and I think what we sort of talked about with Craig specifically, this was right after Helene came through North Carolina, and we were talking about, my experience of going up to the mountains after that and seeing how vibrant that community was to support each other and how quick they were without any kind of hesitation, and how cool that was, because, unfortunately we've seen a lot of things happen, and things will continue to happen where there's hard stuff happening in our world. And I mean, I do feel like that reveals community so quickly, and how strong a community is so quickly when, hard things happen. And I hope that, they can be around when good things are happening too. And that is something that you see, is when something's really hard, is like when you really need people. For instance, when my mother passed away, my husband, this was however many years, 9 years ago. And so I had two little kids. Mark, my husband, was out of town. He was on his way to Dallas, and I got the call that she had passed away. And I was sitting there like on my way to church with, I had like a roast ready to go. And I was like, what do I do? I need to get there. And I have two kids. And I immediately called my church community, my two friends. And I was like, I got to go. Can you take my kids and this roast that I just started? And they're like, without hesitation, I drove them over, dropped them off. My mother-in-law was like, I'm on my way from Florida. My friend was like, I'll go wait for her at the house. So I had 4 people like activate almost immediately, and I was able to leave pretty quickly. And I think about that because I'm like, if I hadn't had that, then that would have been a situation that was already hard, like even harder. So you realize the value of having those people you can call.
Yeah, definitely. I think the one thing that strikes me though is it's really sad that we wait for an emergency to do that. You wait for a storm to sit over top of your house and flood you and your neighbors' homes before you actually meet them and spend that time with them and care about them, like in that way.
Yeah.
It is kind of sad that we wait for those types of events. And certainly, it's wonderful to be able to have people to call. And I definitely have friends on speed dial, on a short list, and they have my name, and all of that is great. But it is also kind of sad that like I don't see my neighbors and hang out with them, but I don't know, but once every couple of years, or maybe at a Christmas party that somebody will organize or something, but it's only like when we feel like it, kind of deal. And I do have, a lot of tools that people could borrow if they needed or whatever. I mean, I remember once, UPS truck got stuck in my neighbor's driveway. He has a steep driveway, and the truck kind of got wedged, coming down, and it got lifted off the ground. And at the time I had a tractor. And so I just, I sold the tractor, but I just went and fired up the tractor and brought around some chains and like pulled the UPS truck out of the problem. It took like 20 minutes and we were done. It was just one of those sort of like things that it was nice to do. And it was nice that I had the thing. I didn't have any real need for it because we left the land that we were on. And so it was nice to be able to have the tool and be able to use it and help somebody out in a tough situation. You never know. Your neighbors might have a tractor or might have a thing and be able to help you out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so it's like, so kind of helping people with tactics on this, because I do feel like sometimes connecting with people becomes really natural, and sometimes you're an introvert versus an extrovert. But what are some things that you think that people can do to get to know their neighbor, maybe when they're first, like they're new in the neighborhood, or even, I think after a couple of years, you're like, well, now it feels weird if I walk over and I'm like, hi neighbor, because I've been living here. But like, what would you say? How would you kind of go about making that connection with somebody who is next door to you or around in your neighborhood?
Yeah. So I think like I suffer from the second issue, which is I've had some people that have moved in and I just never went and said hi. And now it feels weird and awkward because I'm like, hey, I'm the guy that's been living here forever and I didn't welcome my street. But, I would say that when people first move in, or if you see moving trucks, that is actually a good time to go introduce yourself. Like you don't want to stand there and talk to them for an hour, but you just go introduce yourself. If you see the moving trucks and just say, hey, I'm John, I live down the street. Whatever. It's nice to meet you. Let's get drinks, or let's, go get coffee, or we're having a barbecue next week or whatever. Just come over, like that type of thing, to just introduce in a really informal way. And you can do that in less than 5 minutes and not take up a bunch of time. So that would be one. The other would be if they're already moved in and you don't want to mess with them during that time, I would just go knock on their door and come bearing some gift. This is the old Mississippi, my childhood in Mississippi thing where people would always bring a
Brownies.
casserole or
Yeah.
brownies or something and just say like, hey, and I think if you come bearing a dessert for the most part, most people will be really happy with that. And you can just say like, hey, welcome you to the neighborhood, and if they're not there, just a little card with a nice little like, welcome to the neighborhood is another way to do it. You just
Yeah.
go to the drugstore, buy a card, write something nice in it, and put your phone number in there so that they can use you as an emergency contact. Done. You don't even have to meet them and shake their hand in that way.
Yeah, I think that's, I think the moving truck is a good sign that there's somebody who's new and is coming in there, especially if they have kids and you have kids, I think it's like when you're a parent, you're like looking for people who have similar life or life spaces. And my neighborhood, there's people here who are good organizing, like let's get together and go get a beer or let's go to trivia night. And I think trying to attend some of those, like maybe for me, it's not all of them because I just don't have the time to do it. But, trying to pick out a couple things a year that you can be a part of, I think is really key. And then honestly, just walking in the neighborhood, walking the dog. Don't go out and get a dog to meet your neighbors, but that is a good way to do it. Because once we got our dog and we started walking in and started running in the neighborhood, we met so many more people just being out and available or like playing in the front yard or, anything. I think a lot of times what we do is we go in our house and we close the door and it's, it's a sign of like, I'm not open for communication. But if you can just be outside your house more or even walking in your neighborhood more, and then when you see somebody, say, hi, how are you? Where do you live? Like just basic stuff. But I think making yourself more available to meet people in those places where your neighborhood's hanging out, I think is also kind of a safe, easy way to do that. Because I've met so many neighbors just walking or running on the trail outside our house. And, it's funny because we moved to where we lived in 2017 and we didn't get a dog until 2020. But I was like, they started walking the dog and then started running. And I was like, wow, there's a bunch of people out here. You know? So it is kind of a nice way to kind of get out there and meet people and just connect. At least have ideas of like who's in your neighborhood and faces and that kind of stuff.
Sure, absolutely, yes, and I agree. I think a lot of us spend too much time inside, and it is whether people are doing yard work or running or walking. It's good to just say hi and wave, and that's sort of, I guess, another one that we do with at least the neighbors that are next to me when we're pulling out of our driveways or whatever. And we see each other, we wave and say hi. And just even little friendly things like that. It's funny how I think some people just get so busy. It's not that they're mean or that they don't want to. They just get busy. They get their own head. They're like, I got to go here. I got to do this. I got to. Yeah. And then pretty soon, like weeks turn into months, turn into years, and then you're like, I don't know. There's this person that lives next to me, and I've seen their car, their red car, for years. I don't know who they are. So, finishing this up a little bit, what's the ideal amount of closeness that you want to have with your neighbors?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it totally depends on the person who, if you click with them and they're like the same age, same vibe, then why not have best friends who are neighbors? That sounds great. I think, there's that great, I love Robert Frost, like good fences make good neighbors. And I do think for the ones that are your like neighbors, maybe not going to be your best friends, setting boundaries. It's interesting because I also grew up at a time when we were just free range. We just run into people's houses and it was like, hey, I'm here. And I think about that now as a mom, when sometimes this doesn't happen as much, but there's been sometimes like kids just come over and just come into my house to find my kids. And it's charming, but then it's also, since I work from home, a little disruptive. So I think, we communicate with the parents like, hey, just to give me a heads up if they want to come over, totally awesome. But sometimes they're on calls and that kind of stuff. So I think it's like, it totally depends on the relationship you feel comfortable having. I don't want my neighbors like laying out in my backyard or my, whatever. There's not that kind of closeness, but I'm glad to my neighbors immediately around me. They know that if they need something at the grocery store, I'm happy to pick it up. Or like, for instance, my neighbor next door to us picked up our mail for a couple of weeks, and like, that's great. So I think it totally depends on the relationship you feel comfortable having. Yeah. That's actually, you made a really, really good point. A difference between now and when we were kids, and that is people do work from home now. And so homes are a little less open in that way because they kind of need to be in order for, people to get work done. And so that is a new wrinkle, I think. And probably, a good reason to plan things out or to have some sort of boundaries. I think to me, it's like my neighbors are acquaintances for the most part. I wouldn't call any of them like really good friends. We have a couple of friends, I would say, but I wouldn't say that they're like my closest friends or anything like that.
So to me, it's good to have boundaries. It is good to have sort of like allies, if you will, people that you like, that will help you, that will do whatever. But I also don't want to get so close that it becomes a relationship that turns into something where I don't feel comfortable setting those boundaries.
Right. Yeah.
I think that can get tricky too. And maybe that's just me watching too many movies where, the neighbor turns into the stalker and then whatever. And none of that's actually real, but in my head it might be, because that's how all the horror movies seem to start or end or whatever. And you're like,
are they outside your window? I'm like, John, I know you have a weed whacker I could borrow.
Yeah. Or you see that there was that commercial of like the guys that had like direct TV or something, and their neighbors would like peer into the window and watch the game while they were watching the games. I don't know. That's maybe too much. Yeah. All right. So lightning round. How would you personally like to be welcomed into a neighborhood?
Brownies.
Yeah.
It's the best.
I agree.
Classic.
I agree. Brownies, and bonus points for brownies and Haagen-Dazs ice cream. Let's do it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that's great.
Absolutely. Would you ever want to be the HOA president?
I've gotten approached to be a part of the HOA, so I love my neighborhood. The one beef I always have with these kind of situations is it always falls on the women. They always go to the women. And I'm like, hey guys, what about all this? It's 50% of this other human side. And I get it. It's like old traditional roles and things like that. I would be interested, but I wouldn't do it now. We have a really amazing HOA president. She's still in my phone as the president. And I've seen her have to deal with some of the some of the things that just really stink, because people can get really nasty a lot of times when you're dealing with HOA and you're dealing with fees and you're dealing with things like that. I wouldn't want to do that at this point in my life. But maybe when I have more time later, I could take something on like that, because I do like the idea of creating community opportunities, but not right now. You don't have an HOA, but would you ever consider doing it if you did have an HOA?
No, I would not. I've purposely never lived in a subdivision, and I have my own reasons for that. And one of them is I don't want to be a part of an HOA. And I have friends that are in subdivisions, and some of them really like it and love their HOAs, and some of them really hate their HOAs. And I just I own my house and my little 1/3 of an acre, and I just want to be responsible for that. And I like my neighbors, whatever, but I don't want them telling me what color I can paint the door on my house. It's my house. I'll paint it whatever color I want. Thank you. And I don't want people yelling at me to trim the hedges or whatever, and get fined for, we mow our grass, we keep up our house, whatever. But there's always the people that seem to be really overzealous about all the little rules. And it's like, come on, guys, like we're all, so that's just me. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to mediate those fights. I don't want to have to deal with that one person who wants to get everybody else in trouble because their mailbox is, 4 centimeters closer to the curb than it should be, or whatever it is. None of that stuff. I have a friend who he's a guy, and he's the president of his HOA. So we like to joke with him a lot about it, but he's the type of person and the type of mentality. He actually is really good because he's an extrovert. He likes community. He likes to do that with people, but he's also very good at mediating conflict. And so he's kind of got the perfect, I'm an extrovert and I'm good at mediating conflict, very practically minded. So he's the perfect fit to be that type of person, but it is not me. All right. So last one, what's your strategy for getting out of a neighbor conversation when you're in a hurry?
I got to go. I have something in the oven.
Good one.
That's an easy one. Because you don't want to say I have something on the stove, because that's irresponsible. Like, you shouldn't leave something on the oven. It's like, all right, it could be there for 2 hours.
You put some thought into that. Yeah. That's good.
I might have used this.
You might have. I mean, I think now that we both work from home, you can always say, I got to go. I have a call in 10 minutes.
Yeah, cool.
That's a really, really good one. And everybody understands I have a call. I got to get home and, get on the Zoom call. Yeah. And that one's one that you could use even if you don't work from home. You still might have a call in 10 minutes. I'm just saying, like, or
it's true.
Or I'm expecting a call from my parents, or my kid's going to call me, or what. To me, that's a universal one, and nobody's ever going to question it.
That's a good one too.
Just make sure it's not at a weird time. Like if you say I have a call in 10 minutes and it's 1:13, nobody's going to call you at 1:23. So have a call at 1:30 is really good. Like maybe that's
it gets specific.
Yeah.
So it's like even more believable.
Yeah. Have a call at 1:30. And this is one thing that we have learned through talking to people. The more specific you are, the more people are likely to believe you. As long as you keep the specific short. So call at 1:30.
Yeah. And if you feel like if you feel bad about lying, you can just say, I have a call coming up, because in theory, everybody has a call coming up.
That is true. It might be tomorrow, but I've got one coming up.
I do.
Yeah, yeah. I don't have a problem with those kind of little lies when it comes to like getting getting out of something like that. I don't know. Maybe people would judge me for that, but it just feels like sometimes you just need to end a conversation, and it feels uncomfortable
Sometimes.
to just be like,
Yeah.
and we're done. So it's
Yeah.
just easier to have an excuse. But I like yours. It's a good one, and I can tell that you thought about the oven versus the stove. So that's really, really great. All right. Well, that's all for us today. If you've enjoyed this episode, we've got a few other quick quits out there that you might want to go back and listen to. And if you have an idea for a quick quits, we'd love to hear from you. You can visit us at commandqpodcast.com to learn more about joining our quitter community. And you can also go in there and make a suggestion for a topic that we might want to cover. We've really enjoyed this series. It's been a lot of fun just to talk about some random things that aren't so heavy in nature as some of our other interviews have been in the past. So you can find all of our podcasts here. You're obviously listening to it on some channel, but you can also find Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube if you want to see our faces. I don't know if I recommend that. You don't have to look at mine anyway, but you can try. So until next time, I'm John.
And I'm Maari.
And we're reminding you that quitters can win and winners can quit. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute medical, legal, or financial advice. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the guest's own and do not necessarily represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Command Q or Uncompany.